What can be done about all this? Well, that's the question the Scottish Government have been asking themselves ahead of that budget in Holyrood this Thursday. They've argued in the past, of course, that they can't afford to lift the pay of public sector workers to match inflation. They say they don't have the means or the powers to raise that money. But Scotland's trade unions are calling that claim into question. They published a report this week outlining the powers that the government here does have and what more they could do with them. Well, let's dig into this a bit deeper, shall we, with Roz Foyer from the Scottish Trade Union Congress. Good morning, Roz. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Martin.
So, I mean, well, look, we've just heard fairly compelling testimony from the sharp end of this crisis. A lot of your members will empathise with that. That's what they're striking for. They say they need decent pay to be able to live properly. We've got the budget coming up this week. What should the Scottish Government be doing?
Well, they should be using every power at their disposal to start to redistribute wealth through our economy to where it's needed most. And that's about putting money in low-paid workers' pockets. That's about properly funding our essential services and, you know, making the cost of living easier for people. We need some radical decisions now. It's a humanitarian emergency, as the First Minister said. Radical
decisions like what? You put this report together saying, here's how you can get, I think, £1.3 billion extra immediately and 3.3 in the next couple of years.
Absolutely.
What do you reckon they should be? How do you get that money? What do you tax? What?
Well, in the immediate term, we're talking about implementing, for those at the top of our economy, taxing those that have got the serious wealth in our economy, not necessarily taxing ordinary workers, but yes, taxing those on higher incomes.
What kind of taxes are we talking about?
So we're talking about taxes for people earning over £40,000 a year. 8 out of 10 of Scotland's workers are actually on less than £40,000 a year. We're talking about wealth taxes for the seriously wealthy, people with assets of over £1 million. We're talking about property taxes, land taxes. These are all things that the Scottish Government has the power to do right now and can implement under their existing powers. They've got to do it.
I'm bound to say there are teachers out there on 40 grand a year at the moment who'll be saying this morning, I don't feel very wealthy just now, I don't fancy paying much more tax.
Well, indeed, but if we want to create a fairer Scotland, we've all got to pay a fair share. For people who are around about the 40,000 point, someone on 41, we'd be talking about an additional £200 a year, roughly.
What if you're lucky enough to be on 60 grand a year? How much
extra? You're talking about £1,100 a year extra.
100 quid a month?
Yes,
effectively.
yes, indeed. But we're also talking about what you do with that money. You've got to see this in the round. If we don't start putting money into lower-paid workers' pockets, then we're going to very quickly have a huge recession on our hands because workers need money in their pockets to support our small businesses, to spend in their communities, to pay for heat, etc. And a lot of what we want the government to do with that money is about things like reducing rail fares. It's about setting up municipal energy companies so that we can green retrofit our housing to reduce energy bills. There are a whole range of good measures that the government could implement to support the people who are in trouble right now. And what we need is real action, no more words.
So I mean, the headline proposals in this report, income tax hikes for the rich, a wealth tax, replacing council tax with a kind of proportional property tax, you're saying. If it was that easy, why do you think the Scottish Government haven't done this before? Well,
it's not easy. It involves making difficult decisions and, you know, politicians like to get elected. It's not always popular to talk about taxation, but
so it doesn't survive contact with reality, this stuff. That's the problem.
No,
politically, it doesn't go down well.
Well, politically it might go down, not go down well, but in reality, we have to start a grown-up conversation. If we want a fairer Scotland, if we want to close the gap between the rich and the poor, we're going to have to pay for it. And that means taxing wealth, that means redistributing wealth within our economy. The government has the powers to do that. And while we're facing the next 2 years of a UK Tory government that is no friend of ordinary people and will continue to make our lives worse, we need radical action from the Scottish Government if they claim to be on the people's side.
Well, they say they're a progressive left-wing government. They say they demonstrate that in what they do. Are you calling that? Are you denying that?
Well, you've just heard from Tina and you've just heard from your last guest that Action from Children. They're not going far enough and they could go further, and that's what we're asking them to do. If we're going to have a fairer society, we've got to be prepared to tax, redistribute wealth and pay for it.
There's a lot of talk in the papers this morning about, you know, Geissler braced for cuts in the budget coming up. What if the government don't do this, if they don't really squeeze the rich on tax? in this budget?
Well, if they don't do it, what we've got is, you know, the vast majority of working people in Scotland who are really scared. They need help from their government to get through this winter. They need help to feed their kids. It's an absolute disgrace that we have an economy and a society where ordinary working people cannot sustain their lives anymore. So we're going to have a grown-up conversation here as a society about fiscal powers, about taxation. And if the Scottish Government claim to be a left-of-centre government, they're going to have to take some difficult decisions in the period ahead to protect ordinary working people from the onslaught that we're facing.
Just give us that £1.3 billion you reckon they could
Yes.
raise. What would that do? What would that buy?
Well, if you're looking at the net cost of a proper pay rise for public sector workers, that would pretty much cover that in the immediate period ahead. We've also got over £3 billion of reserves sitting in local government that could actually help us to resolve some of the disputes we have on our hands right now and get people through this winter. So we need the people in power to start having serious conversations about how they're going to protect people and show us that they're on our side.
OK, talking about being on side, these strikes that are, we've talked about an advent calendar of strikes every day till Christmas. Do you think you've still got the public on side? I mean, you know, the RMT calling a strike on Christmas Eve, all that kind of stuff. Are you in danger of, you know, wobbling on public support?
Well, you know, in Scotland, the rail strikes have been averted,
Sure.
And you know that's how
Still going to be impacted by.
Absolutely, will be impacted by the UK network and the intransigence of the UK government on that. At the end of the day, I've never seen such high public support for strike action. I think the reason that is because, you know, 80% of workers out there are in the same boat, and workers are beginning to realise that if one group of workers wins, we all win. You know, if we could get a decent pay rise for public sector workers, that would actually push pay up across our economy.
I'm not being flippant, but when you start messing with Christmas, you kind of cross a line for a lot of people, though, don't you? When you start ruining Christmas for families, that may be when things start to change.
I think, you know, you misunderstand the level of inconvenience that people are facing through this economic crisis and real fear. People can't sustain their lives. People are not getting Christmas anyway because they can't afford it.
Yeah.
You know, so at the end of the day, I think people are quite happy to see somebody fighting back for them because right now the politicians are failing us. So next week I want to see them stepping up to the plate and showing us that they're on our side.
Do you see any sign of these disputes that are ongoing here getting closer to a resolution?
Well, I think we've actually had, you know, a fairly constructive resolution to a number of our disputes up here in Scotland. We've seen local government result in a decent settlement this year. Health workers at the moment are being balloted on an improved offer. We need to see that for our teachers, our civil servants in all areas across the public sector. We've also seen some significant wins for unions across the private sector in Scotland. So, you know, when workers come together and take action through their union, most of the time they manage to get a decent pay offer out of the employer.
Mike Lynch was talking about a general strike, saying he doesn't know if it could actually happen, but, you know, not in the kind of 1926 style, but talking about the theory of it, or at least coordinated action, getting everybody striking on the same day to really turn the screw in the new year if things aren't sorted by then. Would you support that?
Well, I would support coordinated action. I think if the governments don't wake up and start really listening to what ordinary working people are telling them, we're going to see higher levels of anger. We're going to see more action taking place because, you know, people can't just sit back and let this happen to them anymore. We've got a situation where the top 20 families in Scotland have got more accumulated wealth than the lowest third of our whole population. This can't go on. You look angry, I have to say. I can see it in your eyes. I mean, do you think that now this is really becoming real? We were talking about temperatures -3, -5. Yeah,
people can't.
this is urgent.
Do you think this could boil over, public anger?
I think it could. You know, we've been through the pandemic. People put themselves and their families at risk, and we all went out and clapped for them. And there is a real, tangible anger among ordinary working people who kept our society going, and they've come out the other end of the pandemic to be faced with destitution. It's not good enough, and we demand better of our governments.
Do you have sympathy with the Scottish Government? I mean, it's not easy, any of this.
No, it's not easy, and I do have a degree of sympathy. They should be getting much more support and help from the UK government, but they, like it or not, are the only thing standing between us and the policies of the UK government. And if they claim to be on our side, then they need to take real tough decisions and action next week.
Right. Well, let's find out what they intend to do, shall we? Or at least we'll endeavour to do that. Roz Foyer from the STUC, thank you so much for